Okay, everybody, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully we have some folks on the line. We might have some people joining us as we go along. But we invited you to this webinar today as a little special educational event. Some of you will know this material quite well. Others, maybe it's new to you. So we've invited some supporters and donors, and we're going to talk for about a half an hour, 45 minutes, about Roundups today. And I'm Corey Golden. I'm the Advocacy and Communications Coordinator for Return to Freedom, and I'm here with Steve Page. Steve is what we call a humane witness. He's our photographer on the range during Roundups, and he'll be talking a little bit as well. So we'll have time for questions, hopefully at the end. Everybody will be muted at the moment. You can ask a question through chat as you go along. You can see the little chat bubble up at the top. And if you're on the phone, I believe it's *6 to get into the queue if you are just on the phone and not on the computer as well. So to get started, why are there Roundups in the first place? As part of the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act of 1971, as it was amended, they are the Bureau of Land Management is tasked with determining appropriate management levels, AMLs, which you'll be hearing a lot about, for wild free roaming horses and burros on public lands. Currently, that AML number, appropriate management level, is 26,715, and that's for all of BLM lands. BLM is responsible for deciding how these AMLs of free-ranging wild horses and burros should be achieved, and they are tasked with creating a thriving natural ecological balance. We would say probably that the AMLs are fairly arbitrarily set, and the National Academy of Sciences essentially said the same thing in 2013. But those AMLs are the primary justification for why there are Roundups in the first place. They'll say that horses on a given herd management area, the place that they're assigned to be, exceeds that population target, and that will be their main justification for Roundups. Other things that you might hear or see in EAs or might be wild horses and burros that are wandering onto adjacent private lands. Public safety and emergencies are ones that we're starting to hear more of, almost to the point of seeming overuse. For instance, we had a Roundup where the sulfur, HMA in Utah, where part of the justification was public safety, that the horses were wandering into the roadway, but at the same time there was a planning process going on to put in fencing in that area. Rather than wait for the fence, they went and held the Roundup anyway. Are helicopter Roundups legal? This is one thing that we get sort of all the time on Facebook, so I thought I would address it. And the answer is yes. Whether or not it should be, that's a personal opinion. We certainly don't like helicopter Roundups, but they are in fact legal under Section 1338 of the Wild Horse and Burro Act. It allows BLM to use helicopters and motorized vehicles in its management. Does BLM have handling standards? In fact, they do. I have a 20-page document out in 2015 called the Comprehensive Animal Welfare Program for Wild Horse and Burro Gatherers. And within that, there's a link there, and when we're done with all of this, we'll be posting the PowerPoint so you can click on that and read what those handling standards are. But they cover everything from how close a helicopter can be to horses, to having a veterinarian on site, to having food and water ready. All of these sorts of things, when horses can be roped. Those are all covered by the standards. Does that mean that the BLM contractors always follow them? No. And that's why it's important that the public and people like Steve are out there watching, so that we can raise these issues as they happen. How many wild horses and burros are captured? So this is just a quick snapshot of the last few years. You can see that in 2012 it was up over 8,000. It's gone down. That's because BLM has said it's up against its capacity for holding horses off the range. It says it has no more space, no more money. Interestingly enough, last year it asked for no more money, And this year, the administration asked for a $10 million budget cut. So they have not really asked for more money either. They complain about the lack of space and lack of funds, but don't seem to do much about it. What happens to captured wild horses? You can see the numbers for adoptions. Those have been low for some time. The BLM is trying to juice up those numbers a little bit by having events on the East Coast and things like that where wild horses can be adopted. And then the sales numbers down there, and what I would note about sales is that currently under the 2004 Burns Amendment, wild horses can be sold without restriction if they're 10 years or older or they've been passed over for adoption 3 times. And the BLM's policy is that it doesn't sell to kill buyers, that if it knows they're kill buyers, that they won't sell to them. How many get sold to kill buyers, we can't really tell. How many fall into the pipeline? A lot of them would fall into the slaughter pipeline to go to Mexico or Canada after adoptions. It's important to note with sale restrictions, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but that at the moment you have these restrictions that sort of limit how many horses can be sold and under what situation. And there are people in Congress right now, and it was part of the administration's budget, that called for removing all sales restrictions, which would be tantamount to kind of getting rid of what they see as a problem, all of these horses in holding, by letting them be sold to anybody. What happens to captured wild horses? Part 2. So we have off-range holding facilities, and you can see that the corrals have at the moment about 12,000 horses. You have about 32,000 horses in off-range pastures. Typically, those are rented from ranchers in Kansas and Oklahoma and some other places. And you have, I believe there's just one eco-sanctuary where there are 595 horses. But you have 44,739 horses off the range now. On the range, as of March 1st, 72,674 is BLM's estimate. That doesn't count foals. And a reminder, again, that their AML is 26,715. And having talked a little bit about sort of the context of this and how many horses get rounded up and so on, I'm going to switch real quick here to Steve Page. Steve, as I mentioned, is our humane witness on the range and a longtime volunteer for Return to Freedom. And it's been his job to stand out there in the cold. And sometimes you're out there for a month at a time on the range, and you might be might be the only person watching a roundup for the day. You might be one of a half dozen. So it is it's a difficult duty, but Steve makes it look relatively easy. And he's going to talk you through a handful of slides that kind of give you an idea of what roundups look like and what can go wrong.
Hi. Yeah, I've been volunteering at Return to Freedom off and on for about 15 years. And then I somehow got into shooting these roundups. And most of the slides you're about to see are from the last year of roundups, which I've covered quite a few of. The first one that's up on the screen, a lot of people don't really understand that there's several helicopters used. It's not just a single helicopter. You can see these horses being pushed rather close by one of these. The horses are typically run for miles. It's pretty harsh terrain. You can see the one pinto in the front has some injuries on her back leg, and there's a little bit of blood running down that. So we'll go to the next slide. And this is from HMA in Nevada, Oahe, and this was taken in December. It's showing the helicopter actually pushing the horses into the trap site, but it's pushing multiple bands. It's not just a single family band. It's quite a few horses. I mean, they were coming in 70 at a time. So it pretty much makes it impossible for them to actually ever know which band was which. It also makes it pretty impossible to match a foal up to its mare. And they just come in these mass quantities. It gets really hectic and crazy, and it's rather unfortunate for these horses. And this one was taken in Frisco, Utah, in July, which is pretty much the end of foaling season. But some of these horses, were coming in really young. I mean, they were looking to be not more than a week old. And you can see how easy it is for some of these foals to get left behind. I mean, they just can't keep up with the rest of the herd. So this pretty much shows that. And this is one of the foals that came in the conger roundup in Utah in July. And these were coming in really young. I mean, this foal is probably a week old. It's been run for miles. It's been run over harsh terrain. And as you can see, it's really young. We found a lot of these got left behind. We saw one on the road the next morning, just sort of standing next to the road by himself. And then that evening, young foal just sort of wandered into the trap site. It was, near the watering hole, so there were foals being left behind. This slide actually shot in Conger, Utah, last July. A lot of these horses just get pushed really hard, really fast. A lot of them get injured. This is just showing, one falling, and hopefully it wasn't too injured, but they do get injured. So in Cedar Mountain, Utah, in February, this is just one single mare who looks to be pregnant, actually. But in this instance, she was pushed by helicopters. She broke away from the rest of the herd. The herd came in, and she took off. So instead of letting this one just slide through, she was repeatedly pushed by this helicopter. Eventually, they came out to rope her while being chased with the helicopter. And then they don't actually remove the barbed wire fences, so that even makes it a little more dangerous. So this one made a last-minute attempt to escape over the barbed wire fence while she was lassoed. Then there's a shot of her in the bottom showing her how she actually escaped with this noose still around her neck. We never found the mare again. They claim they went out looking for her. She's never been located. So at this point, we don't know if she's actually strangled herself to death or if she managed to get this rope off, but it wasn't a nice scenario. This was in Cedar Mountain, Utah, this past February. It was rather a brisk morning. And these horses were run so hard and they came in so hot that this is actually a shot of steam rising off these horses. It's not dust, it's not dirt, it's actually steam that you see rising off of these horses once they came into the trap site. That's a tough one. This mare, you can see she's getting a little banged up, slightly injured. She repeatedly was trying to get back to her foal. The minute they come in these trap site, the mares are separated as well as the rest of the family. The studs are taken separate, but the mares and foals are actually separated. So she was having a bit of a fit. The foal was upset. He was leaping all over, but the mare just constantly was trying to jump over a 7-foot rail. And it just shows how strong the family bond actually is with these animals. But they were never reunited, and this was the last moment they actually were together. So I think I sort of mentioned that once they come in, the trap site, they're separated, but this is the temporary holding pen, and you can see all the mares on one side and the studs on the other side. But these guys have been arch enemies for a number of years, fighting for their bands. And now they're put in a pen rather crowded together, and they're just sort of going at it. It's surprising they don't kill each other, actually. Another shot, this is after they've been separated. It's in temporary holding. Again, it's showing just how crowded it can get in there. And mares are on one side and the studs are put in the other. Another shot in temporary holding. The foals have been taken away from the mares from the stallions. The bands are totally separated, but you can see the mares looking in at the foals that these guys will never be reunited, so it's the last time they'll be around these young foals.
This next slide, just for a little bit of information for you, one of the things that happens when horses come in as they're being separated, they're also given a body score. And this is a standardized scoring system based on what the horse looks like. Just a quick shorthand way for BLM to do this and have sort of a consistent score. And what's kind of interesting about this is that if you've paid attention at all to our coverage of roundups in the recent past, when BLM has made these numbers available, which is not all the time, the numbers have been consistently pretty good in the past year or so. So you're seeing numbers that are 3, 4, 5, 6. That these horses are in pretty decent condition. I bring that up because it runs directly contrary to sort of what you're hearing from some of the lawmakers who are trying to reduce the wild horse numbers. Part of what they will talk about is saying that horses are starving on the range, and the numbers. The body condition numbers of the horses that are being brought in directly contradict that, along with, the thousands of photos and videos that people shoot of wild horses every year. I'll go back to Steve.
This is a shot, actually that's from the Sulphur Range in Utah this last January. And this is the temporary holding pens. We just watched days and days of these horses being run through the ice and snow and slipping and sliding, and they're now being transported to the holding facility out of their temporary holding, but they're all being loaded onto the giant trucks and being sent out. But this is a shot of the horses I found after one of the roundups after they arrived in the Delta, Utah holding facility just after their arrival. This is a shot from PVC, Palomino Valley holding. It's just outside of Sparks, Reno, in Nevada. These horses, once they come in, they're immediately sorted, separated, freeze branded. You can see on the neck, but it's shaved off, and tagged. This is another shot of that same pen at Palomino Valley, showing the lack of any shelters. These foals are left to bake in the sun. It's often triple digits in Nevada, and there's absolutely no shelter for these horses at the time. So it's in the wild they would be seeking shade, shelter, trees, something, but there's absolutely nothing available for them. This was from Oahe in Nevada in December. These lucky mares got released after being treated with PZP. The mares that come in are sorted and separated by age. The older mares get freeze branded, treated with PZP, and you can see some have been branded. There's an AJ on the rear of the one that had been previously treated with the PZP. So some of these have been already treated, but they're lucky to actually be released at this point.
So that's a good segue into, are there alternatives to Roundups? And the answer is yes, there absolutely are. There are actually different kinds of Roundups. We've been pressed BLM enough, and other advocates have pressed them enough that you're starting to see more bait and water Roundups where horses will come in to get the food, and then those close the corral on them, and you're seeing them rounded up that way. BLM still doesn't go for that on large HMAs, but that's, to some degree, it's a sign of progress, and you would like to think that that there would be more use of PZP as well. However, when it comes to PZP, while we've shown it to have a 91% efficacy rate at our sanctuary, and other projects have shown similar really good results, it's still not something that BLM is invested heavily in. Our Wild on the Range campaign, which is sort of our policy platform, also calls for increasing land and herd stewardship, for revisiting those AML numbers to make those more equitable, establishing incentives for ranchers who make water available to wild horses or voluntarily reduce their livestock numbers, increasing partnerships across government agencies, but also with stakeholders, including nonprofits, to manage wild horses with minimally invasive practices, and returning non-reproducing wild horses and burros to sustainable rangelands. So is BLM embracing Roundup alternatives? And the answer is no. BLM has never spent as much as 4% of its annual budget on fertility control. And in 2007, sort of a tragedy in the real sense of the word, in that we got within about 1,000 horses of their AML number, but BLM failed to invest in this safe, proven management tool, continued on with the helicopter roundups, continued to barely spend, if you look at the far right column in that chart, what percentage of their budget that they spent on fertility control. And as a consequence, numbers have shot up. The National Academy of Sciences has also said that, that Roundups, taking young horses off and things like that, actually increases population numbers. So now we're in a sort of, by their definition, it's a crisis because they don't want to give up cattle ranching and things like that to make more room for the horses. So to their mind, this is a crisis. To our mind, if it is a crisis, it's a man-made crisis. So why do Roundups matter more than ever? Well, this year is a particularly dark one, the darkest one in decades for wild horses. There's some moneyed interest in Western lawmakers, and even the Secretary of the Interior and BLM officials are, I said pushing, but basically lobbying other members of Congress to allow euthanasia, which is a lovely way of saying shooting horses, and unrestricted sales, which is, again, a euphemism for slaughter, to reduce wild horse numbers. So to do that, again, they've painted this picture of destroyed rangelands, and they do that somehow without mentioning that livestock outnumber the horses 37-1, and even greater numbers in some places. And at the same time, they paint this picture of starving wild horses despite little evidence to support the claims. They'll pull out one or two photos. They won't tell you the backstory of the photos or where they were taken or anything like that to support their claim. At the same time, wild horse advocates take tons of photos, tons of video, and so do tourists, and that contradict those that story that all across the ranges wild horses are starving. Euthanasia is permitted under the 1971 Act, but Congress has typically inserted protective language barring BLM from killing healthy, adoptable wild horses and burros as part of its annual spending bills. In July, the House Appropriations Committee voted to allow BLM to kill healthy, unadopted horses, and it also voted against slaughter protections for all American horses. So next up, the full House is expected to act on those related appropriations bills, probably within days of now. The Senate has yet to act on the Interior Appropriations Bill, which includes the wild horse and burro budget. Now, as this is going on, as they're having this debate in Congress about whether or not to allow BLM to kill horses, BLM is busy planning roundups for the fall, including a 6,700 horse roundup in Nevada, which would be the largest in years. So what can you do to help? You can take part in the planning process. We try to be good about this. We're going to try to be even better about it, about getting environmental assessment documents up on the website. Then the public has 30 days to comment on those. And perhaps we'll, for folks who are interested in getting deeper into the weeds and wanting to learn how to write those comments, we may do a future webinar on that that's a little more specific. But right now, the single most important thing you can do is call Congress about the proposals that are threatening wild horses for a phone number and a suggested script. We've been updating those at the top of our Facebook page as they change, as the situation changes in Congress, and on our website. If you're a Twitter user, you can find them there. So with that, let's see if we have, so Nancy, I believe you have a question.
Okay, so what I'm curious about is there a way to know who has all of the leases, the current leases of the BLM land in the United States? Is there a way to know that, and who has the leases? Because I think it would be interesting to know, all the oil companies and all that kind of stuff who have leases and that are driving the horses off.
Sure. So those, whether it's a grazing lease or any other kind of use of the land, those should be public record, and that's something that we can request. It's difficult. You have lots of livestock ranchers around a given HMA, so to do that across all of the herd management areas would be a large project, but it might be might be an interesting project because, as you say, if you start seeing patterns of certain landowners or certain kinds of landowners.
Well, and I just think that, the current administration especially is just, they want to open it all up to oil and all those bad people.
Yeah, I mean, they have talked about, it's true that they have talked about, and their phrase is an all of the above energy project. So yeah, I think that's definitely the case. That's something that I will make a note, and we'll see if we can't do something with that. Let me move on to our next question. Hi, Nancy, are you there?
Thank you so much. Could you provide the number of the appropriations bills for the Senate and the House of Representatives? Because when I call in to ask that the wild horses be protected, they always want to know the number of the bill. And I feel that's important. So if I don't have it, I feel like I'm in a weak position.
Sure. I mean, we're talking about the Interior Appropriations Bill and the Agriculture Appropriations Bill.
Right. Yeah.
I can get you this. I can get you the specific numbers, and I will email you those when we are offline.
That would be great.
Janet, you had a question.
I've been looking at this issue for a while, and I was wondering if there's any way, I've made the comment that in the predecessor to the 1971 Act, the so-called Wild Horse Anti-Act, motorized vehicles and aircraft were specifically excluded. And I wonder if there's any legal basis or any way to sort of say, look, this needs to be amended in the current legislation because it doesn't work. We've known since 1959 that it's sort of inherently inhumane and very dangerous.
Yeah, and I think it certainly can be done. It's up to, unfortunately, you have a dysfunctional Congress these days it's difficult to imagine them getting anything done. But one of the things that could be done, for instance, is they could insert language into a spending bill, which is what they do quite often, and direct the BLM to no longer use helicopter roundups. They could mandate that they just did bait and water roundups. They could, if they wanted to, they could mandate that that no horses are taken off the range and that they're managed on the range, which is what we would like them to do. We'd like them to reinvest all that money that they're spending on holding and put that into some real solutions. Because as it is, if you take, even if you, God forbid, they killed all 45,000 horses that are in holding right now, they don't have a plan for the next 45. So this doesn't really get us anywhere when it comes to the things that people are suggesting. That provides no sort of long-term sustainable plan. And we and other organizations have been pushing for a long time for alternatives to that. But yeah, it certainly Congress can do that. But it's been difficult to get Congress to have the will to do much of anything when it comes to the wild horse issue. And as you can see at the moment, it's things are trending away from the horse. As much as we would like to be having discussions about roundups versus not roundups, the discussion in Congress right now is kill versus not kill. So at the moment we're playing defense, but I would love for there to come a day when we were talking more proactively and more members of Congress understood the options that are out there. And that's really been kind of a challenge for us this year because the BLM, Secretary of the Interior, Western lawmakers, they've really done a good job of making an untrue case for why these horses need to go. And countering that, and, they've said, whatever, fertility control doesn't work. I think in the words of the Secretary of the Interior's absolute failure. Well, when you've never spent even 4% of your budget on it, I don't think that that's a fair statement at all. And the projects, whether it's our project at a sanctuary or other ones that have been on the range, the numbers showed that it would work. So hopefully there will be a day when we can turn Congress and subsequently the BLM away from roundups and toward, proven humane alternatives that are out there.
I have one other quick question.
Sure.
What possible justification could there be for, just from the point of view of management or anything, from separating foals from mares? That just seems like manifestly insane.
Justifications for separating foals from mares. And what do they tell you, Steve?
It depends. When they're transporting them, it's about safety. But once they arrive at the holding facilities, they try to, in theory, wait till they're 6 months old to be separated. But lots of times they just come in these huge groups, with multiple bands. They have no way of actually locating the foal's mare. So they are separated. There's just no way of actually locating, the foal's mare because of the huge numbers that come in a given day.
And do you guys have any stats on fatality rates because of that?
Not right now, but Corey's willing to look for those. I can tell you, some do get separated early. I've seen the mares actually, break their neck and die, and so the young foals are trying to usually they try to find a foster home that can do, the milk in the bottle and do the whole foster routine. But a lot of times they just end up in holding, and, they'll try to tell you they're old enough to wean off, but, that isn't true. So they'll sometimes give them supplements, for milk supplements, but that's about the extent of it. Yeah, it's really sad. There's just, when they come in giant herds, instead of keeping them in bands, you have, 7-10 bands. I've seen 70 horses come in at a time, so there's just no way for them to match them up, realistically.
Perfect.
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. It's really horrific.
Yeah, and at the roundups, again, after seeing these foals come in a week old, they've been run for miles, and the next day you hear about a foal just wandered into the trap site by himself, and you're like, huh. And then you drive into the Roundup the next morning, and there's a foal just standing next to the side of the road. I mean, it makes you wonder how many foals actually are left behind. You know, because in a day I've seen 2, so how many are left and just can't keep up because they're too young? I'll give you back to Corey.
So thank you for your question, Janet. Not seeing any other questions at this time. I guess we will close it up. We're done a few minutes early. We will have these slides and the recording online. Again, so not seeing any questions. I am going to say farewell on behalf of Steve and I. We will be looking forward to doing some more of these types of webinars in the future. We're looking at maybe PZP and other subjects. If you have suggestions, I'm at outreach@returntofreedom.org. We'll also be sending you a follow-up thank you email with a link to the slides and audio, as well as some other information on how you can take action on those congressional bills. Thanks, everybody, for taking part today.